Welcome to Another News. I'm Jeff Brady, and you just heard a special fundraiser, Building Bridges, Mimi Rosenberg, who really kicked butt here. She did a fantastic job. This is a special In Other News, and we're offering some very interesting things. Number one, the book Political Ponerology, and that is the study of psychopaths. I'm holding it in my hand, and it's actually a heavy book, but it's thin. It's just a very interesting book, and we'll go in depth about what that is, and we'll hear clips from past interviews regarding this topic in particular. The other premium, that's for $100, that book. The other premium we're offering is the In Other News archive. So if this show is new to you and you thought, hey, this is weird, I'd like to hear more of these shows, and they're not really online. Some of them were archived on WBAI and other websites, but we don't have a website. We just keep going here. We might have a website in the future, but we did assemble all the shows, as many as we could, about 28 or 29 shows. But that's going to be on an MP3 CD disc. So it is a CD disc, but it's an MP3. It's an MP3 format. And that's yours for a $50 pledge. So the book, Political Ponerology, The Study of Psychopaths, and is for a $100 pledge, and then the disc is a $50 pledge. So it's really a great deal. I'll go through some of the shows, some of the shows that we did all the way back March 15th when I started. Tony put me on at 10 p.m. No, I think I was on in the morning. But we started off with geoengineering, and that's what we really look at on this show a lot. We go as deep as we possibly can and on the cutting edge of some of the most top researchers and activists on that topic. Geoengineering, some people say chemtrails, the aerosol operations, whatever you want to call it. We had Bonnie Hoag on, and from the Bonfire Coalition, and Morrow from geoengineeringwatch.org. And then on March 22nd, these are just samples of some of the shows. March 22nd of last year, we had Catherine Albrecht. She's one of the top researchers in RFID technology, and she wrote the book Spy Chips. Remember that? Spy Chips? But we spoke with her specifically about how Google is tracking everything you do, basically. They're keeping a database on your Internet searches. And she insists on using the search engine start page. And I'm sure there are other great search engines as well. But that was March 22nd, and March 29th, we had Rosalind Peterson on talking about her activism in geoengineering and her work with trying to bring awareness to the Navy testing and bombing on the West Coast and on the East Coast, and how marine life is affected. So all of that went through. The military is allowed to bomb and do exercises on the Northeast coast, the Northwest coast, and a lot of people suspect that's why these marine mammals are beaching themselves, etc. We see it in the news, but again, it's disjointed, and you really don't connect those dots. And this show, In Other News, does that, connects those dots. I'm not going to go through every one right now, but April 5th, I'll just do one more. We had Daniel Estelin on, The True Story of the Bilderberg Group, a very controversial book. The Bilderberg Group, known as the Venetian Black Nobility, that's what they were called. Daniel Estelin is one of the top researchers of the Bilderberg Group, just plain and simple. Yes, you've heard other people talk about it, but a lot of the information they took from him. So we're going to go to a clip of a past interview that we did. Let me see, that was January 24th of this year, and we're going to hear a clip from Laura Knight-Jadczyk, who also works with the website Sign of the Times, and she had helped put together this book, Political Ponerology, I think she wrote the foreword to it. But let's go to a clip, and to pledge your support for In Other News, you can pledge right now for Political Ponerology. It's the science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes, and really it's one of the seminal studies on what psychopaths are, who they are, and how they ended up in power. And so, as many listeners know, there are gradations of psychopathy, but we'll go into depth and with a guest later in this hour. But again, that's for a $100 pledge. Call 212-209-2950, and if you want the archives of In Other News, again, the format of In Other News is we do headlines, and we interview the guest, and then we take your calls at the bottom of the hour. So that's all in these archives. You have quite a interesting snapshot of the listeners in the phone calls in these archives. So that's yours for a $50 pledge. Please call 212-209-2950. We're going to go to that clip right now. There is a small minority of the human population unable to experience or comprehend the normal range of human emotions. They're called psychopaths. The study of psychopaths and their rise to power is researched in the book titled Political Ponerology by Andrew Wojciechowski. The original manuscript of this book went into the furnace minutes before a secret police raid in communist Poland. The second copy was painfully reassembled by scientists and sent to the Vatican. There was no acknowledgement. The third and final copy was written from memory. Its publication was then blocked by Zbigniew Brzezinski. The book is described as shocking in its clinically spare descriptions of the true nature of evil. The application of this research is revealed in many books, such as Snakes in Suits, Women Who Love Psychopaths, and much of Chris Hedges' work. In fact, the first sentence in Chris Hedges' article titled Wall Street Will Be Back for More, Chris writes, corporations which control the levers of power in government and finance promote and empower the psychologically maimed. Well, we discuss the ways in which psychopaths rise to power and how they interact within a corporation or as head of state. We'll look at the insidious effects a psychopathic rule has on individuals and groups. It's mentioned in the introduction that this is the most important book you'll ever read, because at some point, no matter where you are, you will feel the touch or relentless grip of evil. We speak first with author, investigator, and journalist Laura Knight-Jadczyk, who wrote the introduction. Laura Knight-Jadczyk, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Okay, this book, Political Ponerology, a science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes. Mm-hmm. The history of this book is absolutely astounding. Laura, can you tell listeners a little bit about your experience about psychopaths and the information in this book?
Yes, I think I can. My personal experience came about through the fact that I was doing some research and writing on the web, and I came under attack by a small gang of individuals who began publishing, what were clearly lies. And these were people who had tried to worm their way into my confidence earlier, and I had thought that they were just basically normal people. And when these lies started appearing, it was what would you say, is disorienting. Kind of the way you feel when you hear yourself on a tape recorder for the first time, or who is this person they're talking about? Who is this person they're describing? I don't recognize this. This is not, part of my reality. Like most people, I thought that, you just need to explain, talk it out, point out the facts, and everybody will understand. But this didn't seem to work. These people seem to have a certain power to persuade and convince people. And I'll give you just a small example. My husband is a scientist and has been a university professor for 30 years. He's retired now. But part of the scientific life is that you often go to conferences, and these conferences are funded by universities, and you get invited there. They take their wives. They have these meetings and so on, and the wives meet together and do different things. So we went to a conference, and it was in Marseille. During the course of the conference, one of the other scientist was a personal friend of my husband. They had co-authored a book on Riemannian geometry together. So he invited us for dinner. They have a little boat. We got in their little boat, and we went out to a restaurant on an island and had dinner, and that's that. So I wrote up a little travelogue for my readers about it with all the pictures, and so forth, and published it on my website. Well, this got turned into a Soros-sponsored luxury Mediterranean cruise. I mean, just so completely divorced from reality that it was shocking. So I had this going on, and I began to research what kind of human being could do these things, and I followed one thread after the other, and that was where I got into research on psychopathy. It didn't take long for me to, put some things together, and I had a team working with me, some people who are actually professionals in the field, psychologists, neuropsychiatry specialist, physician, and, of course, my husband, and I had access to many other professionals in the field that would help me and answer my questions. So I began writing on the topic and publishing articles, and also, publishing articles using this individual who and his team who were attacking me as examples, this material that the author of Political Ponerology found on the Internet and read. And he wrote me a letter because he recognized that I was looking at the same kind of thing that he had experienced on a larger political level. I was seeing it on a slightly smaller social level, like the Internet being like a political sphere of activity, where there are groups that, try to distort the understanding of other people and try to persuade them to believe and see things in a certain way. And then there are, people who are, just trying to tell the truth and do their work honestly.
Right.
So he wrote to me and said, I see you're looking for the same, things that we were looking for then, and you have come to many of the same conclusions, but I can give you some material that you don't have. I can give you some identifications, some classifications, some categories, and I can tell you how they work together. Because, I was asking these questions, like what kind of person would do this? How do they work together? Because it was clear that the attackers that were acting against me were, a semi-organized group, but it wasn't organized in any way that I could really understand. I said, yeah, I'll read it. So he sent it to me.
Mm-hmm. And it was this book?
It was the manuscript.
Were they working on it at the time, translating?
No, he had written the third version of it back in the 80s, but nothing had ever been done with it. He had some problems. He had Zbigniew Brzezinski, who offered to help him, but then buried the book. Several other things happened where he was trying to get this information out, and all he experienced was attacks, too.
We're talking about the author, Andrew Wojciechowski.
Yeah, Wojciechowski. And at this point, he's like, 83, 84 years old when he first wrote to me. I took a little time, and then finally I opened the book one night, and it's not a very big book, as you know. But I began to read, and it's extremely dense and difficult, and it was a lot more difficult before we did, the editing that we did do, which wasn't a lot. At his request, we didn't edit very much at all.
Of the book, Political Ponerology, and that's the book that we're offering this evening. I'm Jeff Brady, host of In Other News, and we were interviewing Laura Knight-Jadczyk, and she had written the foreword to Political Ponerology. Andrew Wojciechowski is the author of this book, and we're going to get into more depth of what this book is about. But it's one of these important texts to have in your possession because a lot of books came out of this book, such as Snakes in Suits and Women Who Love Psychopaths. These books came out of this because this is the seminal book that was written back in the 1940s, I believe. And it was burned and rewritten by memory, and then it was lost again and rewritten once again. And this is yours for a $100 pledge. And this is the second edition under Red Pill Press. And it's just the liner notes reads, the original manuscript of this book went into the furnace minutes before a secret police raid in communist Poland. The second copy, painfully reassembled by scientists working under impossible conditions of violence and repression, and that was sent via courier to the Vatican. Its receipt was never acknowledged. The manuscript and all valuable data lost. In 1984, the third and final copy was written from memory by the last survivor of the original researchers, Andrew Wabachewski. Zbigniew Brzezinski blocked its publication. Big surprise there, huh? After a half-century of suppression, this book is finally available. Political Ponerology is shocking in its clinically spare descriptions of the true nature of evil. It is poignant in its more literary passages, revealing the immense suffering experienced by the researchers contaminated or destroyed by the disease they were studying. And, again, Ponerology, it's a Greek word. It's the study. Political Ponerology is a study of the founders and supporters of oppressive political regimes. Wabachewski's approach analyzes the common factors that lead to the propagation of man's inhumanity to man. Morality and humanism cannot long withstand the predations of this evil. Knowledge of its nature and its insidious effect on both individuals and groups is the only antidote. It's the only antidote. This is yours for a $100 pledge. Support WBAI tonight and support independent media by calling 212-209-2950. Get this book, The Study of Psychopaths, Political Ponerology, and also get the CD MP3 disc of In Other News Archives. It's around 28 shows as MP3s. Together, if you get both, get the pack, and that's the big deal. It's yours for a $130 pledge. So call now at 212-209-2950. We're going to talk with another scholar of the study of psychopathy a little bit later in the hour, but we want to hear your calls of support. We often open the phone lines, and we know there are many listeners that love to participate, but we need your help and support right now to support WBAI and independent media. And in the past couple days, the support for this station has just been wonderful to see and hear. The phones ringing and sit back and answer some of the calls in the tally room and talk to some of the listeners. It's really been a pleasure. It's been a treat. But here tonight, for In Other News, we are offering Political Ponerology, The Study of Psychopaths, the book by Andrew Wabachewski. And yes, it is dense, but this is one of these books that you're going to have around for many, many years. And you're going to sit down and talk with it with your friends and maybe family. And I say that because this book, the content of this book, is so important to everyone right now in everyone's life. You'll see as we go into the evening why it's so important. Because we address in the interview, and we'll address later in this hour, and we're here to midnight, so until midnight. But how do psychopaths rise to power? How do they rise to the top? Who are they? And then most importantly here, we'll talk about, is there any screening mechanism to filter out psychopaths in politics and government corporations? Does that exist? And quite truthfully, it does not. And that's one of the reasons why the study of psychopathy was banned back in Poland, in communist Poland, because a lot of the leadership in communist countries were psychopaths. And they loved to see human suffering, and they fed off of fear and hatred. But it's interesting because the book talks about how a psychopath comes to power, what they're like as children, who are these people. And again, Ponerology in the title is the applied psychology of studying psychopathy. So, and psychopaths in power. And that's really the issue here. Again, there are other books that have spun off of this incredible book, such as Snakes in Suits. But this is the origin. This is where it came from, and this is an incredible book. Yours for a $100 pledge. Please call 212-209-2950. Get this book, support WBAI, support independent media, and also if you want the archives of In Other News, we went through a little bit of some of the guests that we've had, and we stopped at Daniel Estelin, and that was in April 5th, 2010. We talked about the true story of the Bilderberg Group. And on April 12th, 2010, we spoke with Dr. John Hall. That was a very controversial interview because a lot of people thought that we were stirring up trouble when we had him on. He wrote the book A New Breed, Satellite Terrorism in America, and he talked about very advanced weaponry being wielded by former CIA, former NSA, former military, people on the inside that move into the black market and start trading these, this special technology that could, see through walls, that can affect people's frequency and vibrations and torment and abuse people from afar. Dr. John Hall really, he had a personal experience, and in this book he does talk about that personal experience. But that was April 12th. We had, in the calls, by the way, the calls were fantastic, and the calls kept coming. I was in the lobby here, and they kept forwarding calls after the show was done. And I want to talk with the listeners who have questions and direct them to either the author or a place where they can get more information. That's what this station is about, and it's really a delight to be able to do that. April 19th, 2010, I'm going through some of the shows that are on the MP3 disc, the archives of In Other News. Again, that's yours for a $50 pledge. And the book and the CD, the MP3 CD, is yours for a $130 pledge. The Bracelet is a book by attorney Charles Bonner, and the book is about sex trafficking. And this is a man who is determined to stop the $8 billion a year industry of sex trafficking. And he went to Cambodia and Thailand and other countries where sex trafficking is just out of control. His stories will make you cry, but he is a brave man to push through and pull people together to write this book and study and try to end sex trafficking. He is quite an amazing person. I want to have him back on. Charles Bonner, that was April 19th, and this is just another show in the archives. April 26th, 2010, we had on Amy Worthington, and she spoke about cell phone radiation and the Gwen towers and just the general science of how radiation from cell phones, make the DNA spill out of cells. And that's the first stage of cancer. And May 3rd, 2010, we had attorney Paul Biberon from the New York Coalition Against Water Fluoridation, and we talked about fluoride. And this is before the Peter Vallone legislation in New York City Council to remove fluoride out of the drinking water. So just going through a couple of the shows in the archives for In Other News. That's yours for a $50 pledge. And the book, Political Ponerology, is yours for a $100 pledge. Please support WBAI. Both of these premiums are yours for a $130 pledge. We're going to go to another clip from the interview with Laura Knight-Jadczyk. We're talking about political ponerology, the study of psychopaths, and she was in the center of it, and you'll hear more right now.
I read it, and I just, the hair stood up on my head. I says, my God, he is describing on a large political scale exactly what I have seen and experienced via these attack groups, this counterintelligence program that has been launched against me on the Internet. And not just me, there are others. I mean, there's like an infiltration and a corruption, and it's something that's so insidious that it's unbelievable, because any group can get together with a benevolent goal, say, for example, 9/11 Truth, and with the right kind of pathological individual involved in the work, that group can be corrupted and turned around and have everything that's inside them, all of their goals and objectives, turned and twisted till they end up, just fighting with each other.
One bad apple.
And yeah, that saying is absolutely true, because it's a poison. There's some work done by Paul Babiak and Robert Hare, who are two of Hare being, kind of the world's living expert on psychopathy.
Mm-hmm.
And they wrote this book, Snakes in Suits. Babiak, was doing some consulting work for the corporations, and he goes in there and he has this situation, and he really says, well, there's something wrong here. He was basically seeing kind of the same thing I was seeing in these internet dynamics. And he wrote to Robert Hare and described, and Robert Hare said, well, you've got a psychopath in there in the bunch somewhere. And, sent him his psychopathy checklist. The guy checked the guy off, and, the person in the corporation, and discovered, well, lo and behold, he probably is a psychopath. And one of the things they do in the way they check out a psychopath,
mm-hmm.
it's not just the self-report, because the chief characteristic of a psychopath is that all they do is tell lies. So it's not just lies. You have to get information.
Very, very persuasively, I understand, too.
Oh, yeah. You have to get information from people who work with them closely, and also their background. You have to check out factual data about their background. I don't know if you've seen the little movie I, Psychopath about Sam Vaknin.
No.
But this is a fascinating movie. Really look it up and try to have a look at that one, because not only did they take him in and test him with the psychological tests, and he scored very high, but they also, unbeknownst to him, sent for his school records, interviewed his family members, his close friends, teachers, people he'd grown up with, and so forth, because if he was going to be telling any lies about his life or his experiences, they would, be able to get the information that would either validate or invalidate what he was saying from numerous sources. A psychopath has a unique ability to persuade people that what they're saying is the truth without anybody ever thinking or bothering to go and check the facts and data.
This was your catalyst for studying the nature of this condition.
Mm-hmm.
And so here we are. Now you have this broader understanding. You've gone through this book. Now let's look at what you've learned in your research now. We can start by looking at some of the psychopaths maybe in charge of the economic problems that the country and the world is facing. Those people that, like on Wall Street, not all of them are psychopaths, but no. The system is diseased. What is the nature or the relationship between those people who aren't psychopaths, but they're under a psychopathic system? Let
me give you a little example. Take the legal system. The legal system is set up so that basically it's kind of like a trial by ordeal. In the old days they had the trial by ordeal. If you were telling, they touch your tongue with a hot poker, and supposedly if you're lying, your tongue will be dry, and the poker will burn you. But if you're telling the truth, your tongue will be moist, and the poker won't burn you. Well, a normal person who feels fear, his mouth is going to go dry, right? Mm-hmm. And the poker is going to burn him. So the person who is feeling fear, not because he's a liar, but because he's normal, is going to be burned and be condemned. But a psychopath who feels no fear whatsoever can lie and touch his tongue to the hot poker, and it'll be moist, and he won't get burned, and he gets away with it. Okay. In the legal system we have today, it's a little more advanced than this old trial by ordeal, but it's not that much different, because you're getting tried in front of a jury of your peers, right? But these are people who do not know you. They do not know who's accusing you. They do not know the attorneys. They know nothing except what's allowed to be presented in court. And then you take an oath, right? The oath acts on an honest person with a conscience. I am swearing to tell the truth. And, of course, if they tell a lie, they look guilty, their eyes shift around, they make these funny movements. All of these studies about, how to tell when somebody's lying applies to a normal person who's trying to tell the truth or tell a lie. But it doesn't apply to a psychopath. A psychopath can get up there, swear an oath, and lie so convincingly that an innocent person is condemned.
This is really fascinating. It points out in the book Political Ponerology, our guest Laura Knight-Jadczyk had written the introduction for. It points out in the book that a psychopath in early childhood may look at someone crying as, oh, there's water coming out of their eyes. That's interesting. And then learn to understand that these are emotions and then begin to mimic them. And if they're very, very intelligent, they begin to mimic other emotions but carefully craft the art of lying with no emotion at all. However, do you often wonder about somebody that really lives on a bed of lies throughout their lives? How can they remember all of that?
Well, it's funny because psychopaths seem to have no problems. It's like their brains are like if-then constructions, but then if they get caught in a lie, they go along and continuously create their reality from one minute to the next. Hare gives the example of somebody who was caught in a bald-faced lie in the courtroom. They've had a cast of his shoe print, and an eyewitness, and he still insisted he was being railroaded and that they were all just attacking him for no good reason. In his reality, he had done nothing wrong. He gives, if you've read Hare's book Without Conscience, he gives some really comical interviews with criminals. But you got to understand, Hare worked with criminals. Koehli worked with a little bit more upper-class people who were not exactly criminal but got put into a hospital by their families because they were a big problem. Mm-hmm. The biggest problem are the psychopaths that we can only infer exist based on what little we can glean from those that come under our scrutiny in prisons or hospitals or, quite by accident. And actually, there is one really good way to find out what goes on with psychopaths, and that is by talking to the victims.
Talking to the victims is one of the top ways because, as Laura Knight-Jadczyk, who we've just heard in that interview, mentioned, you will rarely or never get a confession out of psychopaths, even when maybe there's DNA evidence. But that just shows you how incredible this topic is. The book is Political Ponerology. That's the book we're offering for a $100 pledge. The CD of In Other News, it's an MP3 CD of In Other News shows. That's yours for a $50 pledge. We went through just a handful of them, but together the whole thing is a $130 pledge. Yours, if you call right now or when you call, 212-209-2950, and support WBAI, support this Pacifica radio station this evening, and the show In Other News. I'm Jeff Brady, and we're on the line here with us. Joining us is one of the top specialists in political ponerology. His name's Harrison Koehli, and he has done a lot of work in the study of psychopaths in power and how they operate among normal people. He's also with Red Pill Press Publishers. Harrison, how are you?
Good, Jeff. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's a delight to have you to talk a little bit more and in depth about what this is, what this condition is, and the importance of it. Can you just even begin about identifying the importance of learning about psychopathy and those psychopaths in power around us right now, especially with this the scare tactics and the Osama bin Laden issue?
Well, that's really the way to see is the hidden reason that the world is the way it is. When we look through history and when we look even just in contemporary times, and as a person with a conscience will look at that and be horrified. If you look at the history of the church, warfare, corrupt governments, feudalism, slavery, and we wonder, well, how does this happen? It doesn't seem to make we see the world and the way and the president.
Harrison, guess what? You're breaking up. Harrison, I tell you what, we're going to hang up on this line and we'll call you back and we'll just try it again, okay? So we're going to call you right back. And, that's what happened last time we tried to reach him. It took like 5 times to call him when we went live. That's the problem sometimes when you use a calling card, or he's in Canada right now. So we're doing the best that we can here to cover these amazing issues, but sometimes technology isn't what we'd like it to be. And here's what's also going on. We're trying to we do have long distance, but it's not on every phone, I suspect, and I think those are budget cuts that occur on the station. And it's just another example of how we really need your support to help the station sound better. So call 212-209-2950, and we're offering the book for a $100 pledge, the book Political Ponerology. It's a study of psychopaths, a science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes. And we might have him back on the line, do we? We do. Hi, Harrison.
Hi, yep.
Oh, wow, you sound much better. As you were saying, go ahead.
Okay, well, if we look at this situation, the human situation, it seems to be this great mystery, and we don't know, and we haven't known what the cause of it is. And if we look at the history of reform and attempts at reform, none of them seem to have worked, because we're still where we've always been. Of course, the names have changed, the faces have changed, even the outer forms of the beast have changed, but the effects are still the same. And with, as you brought up with Osama bin Laden, we have this farce of an operation that's gone on. And if you take what the government is saying, even at face value, then what we have here is an extrajudicial assassination allegedly helped along by the use of torture on captured al-Qaeda members. And personally, I think the story is ridiculous, just every piece of it. But if you just take that at face value, it's horrifying to have this kind of behavior endorsed and cheered on by the public and by governments around the world. It just shows the kind of mindset that we're living in, that this kind of thing can be condoned and even supported. And
oh yeah, I was in Ground Zero on Thursday with Sandra Hicks, and they were shouting us down with USA and a-hole really loud, and he had a shirt that said 9/11 was an effing lie, and it's very it provokes people and everything, but he held his ground. But to get this wave of hatred and intensity at that moment was just, you really understood it. And the other thing I wanted to get into is in the book Political Ponerology that we're offering for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950 and support In Other News and WBAI. In this book, they talk about the historical cycle, the cycles in social movement that contribute to the phenomena. And as you were talking, the war on terror and how they just amp up the social hysteria, this is a critical sociological factor that psychopaths take advantage of. They talk about that. That's really what we're going through right now, because since the Osama bin Laden news, this wave of propaganda, now, of course, here come all the stories of, the toy left on the road and all of that.
Yeah, it's, again, there's only one word, or there's a few words to describe it, and absurd and ridiculous are two of them, because this cycle of hysteria is, like you said, it's one of the most important factors that facilitates the rise of psychopaths into positions of power. And just in a few words, what it basically is it's a social cycle where people's ability to think goes out the window. And if you think about when you can't think, when you're actually in a state where your mind isn't working, what that really is basically a state of fear. That's one of the things that gets you going. And so this promotion of social hysteria, you've got the bomb scares of, like you said, toys on the road, and it's been happening for years. It's been happening since 9/11, and you get people walking on the streets, with a backpack, and people thinking it's a suicide bomber. You get that in Israel a lot. There's the same cycle going on in Israel, and it keeps going and going. And what happens is that people, like I said, lose the ability to think. They stop thinking critically, and they start becoming like those people that were shouting you down at ground zero.
Yeah, it was irrational, and it was emotional, and it was chest beating and name calling. That's all it was. There was no exchange of information and facts and points of view. It was just emotional and irrational based, emotionally charged, all of it, and it almost got violent. And I thought we were both going to get pummeled and beat up by a combination of union construction workers, some guys who were just angry about 9/11, and then some soldiers. Mm-hmm. So, and meanwhile, there were just 10 or 20 people with their iPhones and cameras on us the whole time. So it was really something to behold. But above this all it's being orchestrated by psychopaths in power. And if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, it's two things. It's being orchestrated and it's being exploited. And that's the way that the game works. And the modus operandi of psychopaths in power is the path of least resistance. So they'll take the easiest way out. So if there's a possible threat or fear to exploit that's just naturally occurring, they'll do that. If there's a gang or a mob on the street that can be steered in a certain direction, they'll do that. But when they need it, when they need it at a certain time in a certain place, they'll manufacture it. And so you get these two types of situations that come about. There's the created ones and just the ones that they just happen to be able to use in the moment. And so this latest Osama bin Laden one could have been either. It's difficult to know exactly what went on. It could have been some kind of operation that they had to do for some reason, and they just tagged on that it was Osama bin Laden, even though there's absolutely no real evidence that he was there at that time, and in fact he's probably been dead for 10 years now. And so that it could have been that it was another operation. They just tagged this on because, hey, it's useful. It happens to be at a time when they could use it, or it could have just been a total fiction from the get-go.
Right, the outside enemy creation, the fake enemy.
Yep.
Yep. Go ahead.
And that's exactly what it is. It goes right back to Orwell, and Orwell had it right, even though he presented the ideas in the form of fiction. There's so much great information in that book, 1984. The whole character of Emmanuel Goldstein and how this rebel leader, this legend among the people that were against the party, turned out to be a fictional creation of the party itself. He was basically, if he ever existed at all, he became this tool, this controlled opposition, a way of controlling the people that were opposed to the party. And that's what Osama bin Laden has been. That's what Al-Qaeda is. It's a fictional creation that is brought up, they're a tool in their bag of tricks. They're brought out whenever needed in order to fulfill a certain agenda. And it works that way every time. And so all you have to do when you read the news is, so whenever there's some kind of terrorist scare, either in the airlines or just anywhere, and we'll use the airlines as an example. So there's this the crotch bomber, the underwear bomber, and another ridiculous story from a few years ago, and then
I just want to stop you there on that one because once and that man was from Yemen. Of course, once that happened, then the President Obama had suspended any release of Yemeni prisoners from Guantanamo. So they already had a hard time leaving Guantanamo. Now they weren't, suspended. They were slated for to be released at some point, and that was suspended indefinitely. So you had that, and secondly, you had the handler who I believe was Indian in a suit who guided that underwear bomber, and then you had the backscatter radiation scanners set and ready to go even before that event happened, and then you had the former Secretary of Homeland Security, Chertoff, with his Chertoff Security Group, profiting off of these scanners. So, I mean, these are really important. Is this where you were going?
That's exactly where I was going, and you said it better than I would have, so thanks for that.
Hey, well, I mean, we're really pleased and happy to have you on to discuss in depth this book, Political Ponerology. Our guest here tonight on this special fundraising edition of In Other News is Harrison Koehli, and again, he's a specialist in political ponerology, and that's a study of psychopaths in power. That's what this book is. It's yours for a $100 pledge. When you call 212-209-2950, you get the book. You can also get the MP3 CD of past and other news shows for a $50 pledge. Together, it's yours for a $130 pledge. When you call 212-209-2950. We need to see a couple phones light up, and we're going to get into depth here on the topic of psychopathy and what that really is. We're covering, some of the real-world application of how psychopaths are manipulating people, politics, resources right now, and especially how they're manipulating people and manipulating their fear, and how it all works together, orchestrated with the mainstream media. This is not something that's being made up, and this is something that has been recently uncovered because the study of psychopathy is a missing piece of the puzzle right now, because they banned the study of psychopaths and how and who and what they are, because if there was any kind of screening system, then a lot of these people who have risen to power become dictators and fascist dictators. They would never have gotten through the door to begin with. And then you start to look at the screening systems. Do these screening systems exist? And there was a recent story that I sent you, Harrison. But before we even talk about that, we need to see a couple phones light up here. And to begin to support WBAI, call 212-209-2950 and get this book, Political Ponerology. It's a fantastic book. It's one of the seminal studies on psychopathy, psychopaths, how they rise to power, who they are. And it's a very rare book, and that's why we're offering it to you this evening for a $100 pledge. Call 212-209-2950. Support WBAI, support independent media, and free speech to get this information out. Also, we have the CD of MP3s, nearly 30 shows of In Other News. It's yours for a $50 pledge. Together, a $130 pledge. Call 212-209-2950. Going to this story, thank you for that call. A Cambridge University scientist says evil is a lack of empathy, which can be measured and monitored and is susceptible to education and treatment. There's a lot I want to talk with you about this particular story. It's really interesting. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I just want to preface this by saying I haven't read his book. We're talking about Simon Baron-Cohen, and he's written a book, I think, called 0 Degrees of Empathy. And his idea is that, what we've called evil, and he doesn't like the word evil, is basically a lack of empathy, which I agree with. The part where it gets kind of murky is something you just mentioned. He thinks that empathy can be, let's say, fostered or learned or taught to people without empathy. And that's where it gets a little bit tricky, because from everything that I've read and from what the actual experts in psychopathy say, because Baron Cohen, he's an expert in autism and Asperger's, but as far as I know, not an expert in psychopathy. All the experts in psychopathy say that psychopaths do not have any empathy. Now, and they'll both agree on that, but this is an important point, because we need to understand what empathy is in order to figure out this problem. Now, so
tell us what that is, because here it says it defines empathy in two parts as the drive to identify other people's thoughts and feelings and the drive to respond appropriately to those thoughts and feelings.
Okay, and so that's a definition. I think it's a pretty one-sided and incomplete definition. What he's basically describing can be called, let's say, cognitive empathy. So that's the ability to, look at a person and get an idea, say, okay, I think this is what this person is feeling and thinking, and I think this is what I should do to be able to do what I should do right in this situation for that person. Now, that is a cognitive process. It's a thinking process. And anyone with a great brain can do it. And that's this murky area I was talking about, because psychopaths can be very intelligent. They can read clues very well. They can see people's facial expressions. Well, some, not others. There are tests that show they can recognize some emotions better than others. But they can see these signs, they can pick up on them, they can get an idea of what's going through the other's head, another person's head, and but the thing is they see it very cognitively, almost in a game theory manner. Okay, if I do this, this person does that. If I change this, if I do this differently, this person will go in another direction. It's almost like, it's like a chessboard, and they're just moving pieces. And so that can be cognitive empathy. I can see that a person's uncomfortable in a situation, and then I can remember that this person had yelled at them, so I might get an idea. Okay, maybe they're upset that this person had yelled at them, and I can form this conclusion in my mind, and I can formulate a plan after that. Okay, well that's all well and good, but I don't think that's empathy.
Okay, so then empathy is more about the feeling itself, where
Exactly.
you can sort of understand how a person is feeling because of what had happened, and you're not trying to second guess with your mind. It's more with the heart-mind connection.
Mm-hmm. So just an example would be when you're reading the newspaper or watching the news. Now, I'll preface this by saying that the media take advantage of empathy, and and governments do, and that's the way it's always been. Psychopaths and people and political elites use people's best traits and their emotions against them. They manipulate them.
I'm glad you mentioned that. So
when we have, let's say, a news report on a different country, some other country where there's a war going on, and they have this, human interest piece on this family, and they go into the detail. They've got the music, and you get into this life, and you see, let's say, this child, and it's this child's life who's been killed, brutally in war, and you see their parents weeping and crying, and you see all of the destruction around, and all of their emotions, and you cry, and you feel their loss, and you feel everything that's going on, and just the heartbreak and the hopelessness of the situation. And when you feel another person's emotions, that's the first part of empathy. But like you said, there's a heart-brain connection. That's the heart. Now the brain is also a part of it, because if you just feel it, now it's a very automatic thing. And this will get back to the Baron Cohen thing about him saying that some people lack empathy and that's the root of evil. That's the truth. But the sticky point is that when a person lacks this thing, it's something that the majority of other people have, even to a very small degree. So everyone, every normal human that is not a psychopath is programmed this way. It's our genetics. It's our biology. We are biologically programmed to respond with emotion to another's emotion. It's called limbic resonance, or it uses mirror neurons. It's been called sympathy or emotional syntony. But the thing about that is that everyone, or practically everyone's got it, but it's at that level, at that base emotional level, it's fickle. It can go one way or the other. If you wake up in the morning and you stub your toe and you cut yourself shaving, and someone flips you off and swears at you as you're coming out of your apartment, and you're basically in a bad mood, then you've basically been primed maybe to not be as empathic as you'd usually be. So you walk on the street and someone does something to you, and you might respond with an outlash at them. You might swear at them, forgetting and not remembering yourself, not being able to put yourself in that person's position, and just treating them, as, well, you're in a reactive state. And so it's really just, come and go. It depends on who you're with, the situation you're in, what the feeling of the group happens to be. And that, I'm going to make a couple circles around here. That comes back to the people that were telling you off at Ground Zero. They were in this group high, this group state, where their empathy for you was turned off. Some of them might have been ready to lynch you, and that's very common. So they're in this opposite state from empathy. Their emotions have switched them in this other direction because they're functioning on that group level with that group. They're basically high on their emotion at the moment, which is the vengeance and the great feeling. It's like the feeling that their teams won in sports, when actually it was their covert ops military that's just assassinated someone, and yet they identify that with sports. Like, that's the same feeling that they get. So they didn't have any empathy at that time. But I'd say that probably the majority of those people, if you catch them at a different time, in a different circumstance, they'd probably respond with some degree of sympathy towards you, just in a different situation, and probably if they didn't know who you were.
True. You really put an interesting spin on this. The people that you're talking about are not true psychopaths, but they were manipulated to respond in similar ways by psychopaths. But that's not really where we're going necessarily. We're looking at the psychopaths in power, but yes, human beings, regular human beings who are not psychopaths, lose empathy periodically for various reasons. I understand that. To get into the screening of psychopathy in those who are psychopaths, that's another realm, and I'd like to talk with you in depth a little bit more on that. But before we do that, we need to see a few phone calls on the board here. Our guest is Harrison Koehli, and he is one of the experts in political ponerology. Ponerology, Greek word for evil, but it is the...
Please remember that this program is supported by the listener members of WBAI New York. If you like what you hear, please consider becoming a member of WBAI or renewing if you've already joined. Basic membership is $25, but we accept any amount. Help us keep free speech alive. This free program is paid for by the listeners of WBAI New York. If you're not already a member, think about joining us to help keep free speech alive.
Harrison is our guest here, and he has worked with others who have published this book, Political Ponerology, by Andrew Wabachewski, and this is yours for a $100 pledge. Please support WBAI by calling 212-209-2950. You get the book for a $100 pledge. You'll also get, for a $50 pledge, In Other News MP3 CD. So it's over 28 shows of In Other News, some from last year, 2010. I went through just a few of the topics here. We talked with Catherine Albrecht about spy chips. We talked with Rosalind Peterson about geoengineering. We talked with Daniel Estelin about the Bilderberg Group. We talked with Dr. John Hall about satellite terrorism in America. We talked with Amy Worthington about cell phone radiation. We talked in depth about fluoride, the harm, the toxicity of fluoride in drinking water with attorney Paul Bieber. We talked with Bill Brown about surveillance cameras in New York City. We had a call-in show about the BP oil disaster. And again, we go in depth with on the aerosol operation, the effects to agriculture, the effects to the human health, to the health of trees and forests, what that does to the soil. We talked with Michael Murphy, one of the producers of What in the World Are They Spraying, and on and on. We go in depth. If you want a really interesting cross-section on the topics of the aerosol spraying that you see up in the sky, you're not sure what's going on, this is covered in depth in the archive here of In Other News. It's yours for a $50 pledge. You have questions about it, it's right here, and you can just go right through it. We also talked with Dr. Joe Slate on his book, Psychic Vampires, which kind of relates to what we're talking about today, Political Ponerology. And we have the book, Political Ponerology, yours for a $100 pledge. Harrison, hold on. The number, by the way, is 212-209-2950. And we have volunteers, believe it or not. It's 11 p.m. We have volunteers waiting for your call this evening. Call 212-209-2950. Get Political Ponerology for a $100 pledge, or get the whole pack, the MP3 CD and the book, for a $130 pledge. Call 212-209-2950. Support Pacifica Radio, support WBAI, and support In Other News. We need your support this evening, and we need your show of support this evening. Call 212-209-2950 and get the book, Political Ponerology, for a $100 pledge. Now let's talk about the book for a second in terms of the book as a guide, and I know it's dense reading, but it's really good reading. This is a book that you would have for a very long time. Harrison, what are your thoughts just on this book alone?
Well, personally, I think it's one of the most important books ever written, and that it should be read by politicians, lawyers, and professors, and it should be taught. At least the concepts should be taught at a young age. I would have loved to have a course like this in junior high or high school, and even a general psychology course at those times, because that's really the knowledge that makes a difference, is this psychological knowledge, not only about normal human psychology, but deviant psychology, so psychopathologies. And so I think this is the book that can make a difference, and because it gets into the root causes of all these things that have been shrouded in mystery for so long. I think this is like in Star Wars, it's the last hope. It's the thing that can make a difference. Mm. And so I'm glad that you're supporting the book. I'm glad that you're giving copies away with donations, because this needs to go places, and people need to read this material.
It is, yeah. I think it's incredible. But let me ask you, why do you think the leaders in communist countries banned the study of psychopathy and the study of psychopaths?
Well, it's pretty simple. It's the same reason that we have phrases like wolves in sheep's clothing. If you have a wolf or a fox in a hen house, if you have a fox going in the hen house, the hens know what the fox looks like. It's like the Canadian politician that I always forget his name. I think Tommy Douglas, who had he had a little parable he'd tell at his meetings, and that was that the cats and the mice, and the politicians were the cats and the people were the mice, and the mice always elected the cats. And the reason that these animals, so there's this qualitative difference. There's this difference between the two, and that's the difference between a psychopath and a normal person. And the reason that the study of psychopathy was banned, it's like the wolf taking off his sheep's clothing. He's exposed. When you have the ability, when you have the science to expose the leader, the psychopath, for what he is, then then the wolf gets shot by the farmer, the fox gets expelled from the hen house, and politicians and psychopaths would not be allowed, and they would be actively denied these positions of power. So when they've entrenched their power, when they've come to power, what Wojciechowski and his colleagues discovered was that these people, they had this kind of knowledge. They knew something about it, because as soon as they took over, all of a sudden the libraries no longer had the kinds of books that would have been helpful to diagnosing these problems. Those subjects were banned in universities. Everything was changed, and that's because if this stuff is allowed to be taught widely, or even or generally understood, or even taught to select groups, it's a great danger to those in power, because this is the tool to diagnose the problem, and from there the solutions come. And psychopaths can't stay in power as long as people I'm losing my train of thought. Mm-hmm. Psychopaths can't stay in power if people know and are able to diagnose the problem. They need it to be hidden. They need it to be secret. And so that's the way it was in the Eastern European countries. It was totally blocked, totally embargoed, and so these things had to be studied in secret. If you were caught studying these things, you'd be arrested, tortured, and or murdered. And that was a reality. Most of, like when Wojciechowski wrote his book, he was one of the last ones. When he sent us the book, when he sent us his manuscript, mm-hmm. he was the last one alive.
Wow.
He'd lost so many of his colleagues and friends, and it's like, I won't hesitate to say that it's a miracle that this book even survived. Okay. That this one man was able to get the small, because this wasn't even everything. There was so much knowledge and research that was lost simply because, they had to operate in secret, and so Wojciechowski, the author, didn't even know all the people involved in the research. It had to be passed around secretly and anonymously. And the reason they did this, because they understood the situation they were under, the conditions, that if one of them was caught and if one of them was tortured, they could reveal the whole bunch. So they specifically and consciously decided not to even be aware of everyone in their little circle of scientists. They didn't even necessarily know each other's names. They just had each other's research.
Wow,
yeah.
I didn't even know that part. That's incredible. Listeners, did you hear that? This is the book, Political Ponerology, that we're offering for a $100 pledge. Calling 212-209-2950. We'll send you this book. You'll be supporting WBAI. This $100 will go a long way. Call 212-209-2950. Get Political Ponerology, The Science on the Nature of Evil, adjusted for political purposes. It's by Andrew Wojciechowski. We just heard Harrison Koehli, a specialist in political ponerology, the study of psychopaths and power, describe how difficult it was to get this book right here, even in the station today, and not even to mention back in the 1930s. But we now have this book. This book almost didn't even get into the hands of Harrison and the publishers that he works with. This is a very special book, an important one, a missing piece of the puzzle, and a key to understanding what's going on psychologically behind the scenes of some of the most trying times that we're experiencing right now. And I'm talking about the people in Wall Street. Now, Chris Hedges writes a lot about this material. I don't know if he's got this book, but I think he would really like this book as well. Please call 212-209-2950. Get Political Ponerology for a $100 pledge. Support In Other News. Support this Pacifica station here in New York City. We need your support this evening. Also, we're offering the CD of MP3s of the archives of In Other News. It's up more than 28 shows. That's yours for a $50 pledge. Both together, a $130 pledge. It's a great deal. You can't go wrong here. Call 212-209-2950. We're talking with Harrison Koehli. Again, he is one of the experts in political ponerology. He's in Canada speaking with us about this topic. Do you know about people, Harrison, that are studying psychopathy here in the United States?
How do you mean? Like,
are there do doctors study this? Because I'm thinking here, this person at Cambridge. Do you think there's going to be a screening system to diagnose psychopathy in any significant way, a screening system?
Okay. Well, there are several researchers that their specialty is in psychopathy. The problem that I've seen is that their approach is pretty narrow. It's almost as if they went to grad school and thought, okay, what am I going to do? Well, this sounds interesting, or maybe their prof studied psychopathy, and so they get into it, and then, they get there, they just, follow the protocols. They go to prisons. They find the psychopaths that are in the prisons and do the PCLR on them. That's the psychopathy checklist. That's the standard diagnostic tool for criminal psychopathy. And then they, get them into the lab and they do little tests here and there, and they get some good research, some good results, but they don't seem to see the big picture as far as I'm concerned. They see the significance in terms of just crime, but a lot of them don't even get into the issues of successful psychopathy. Now, these are the types of psychopaths that will be like in Wall Street, for example. You brought up Bernie Madoff, who's a great example. But there's a smaller subset of these academics, these real scientists and researchers that do get into this area. But so that's a smaller subset. And one of the things that they've developed, Robert Hare, who Laura Knight-Jadczyk had mentioned in the segments you were playing before we started talking, he and his colleague Paul Babiak, they wrote the book Snakes in Suits, and that's about psychopaths in the workplace, so psychopaths in a corporate environment. And so they developed what they call the B scan, the business scan, and it's a diagnostic tool for identifying psychopathy in the workplace. So it's something that corporations or businesses can use that's in their when they hire people to try to screen out psychopaths. So it is starting to go in that direction. Unfortunately, that's the only place I'm aware of that it's being used is in some businesses, and but that it's a start.
I understand. Chris Hedges was writing about this, how I think at the Lehman Brothers intentionally hired psychopathic people to do trades in Wall Street.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. I didn't read that article.
Or Goldman Sachs, some investment firm where they wanted psychopaths who wouldn't feel anything by making these really terrible trades. They wouldn't be emotionally affected.
Yeah, and either it's a strange situation because that's one of the things that Hare and Babiak talk about in their book, actually, but they look at it maybe from a somewhat rose-colored glasses tinted perspective. I'm not sure. They say that corporations will hire psychopaths and they'll look for those traits because they think that they'll get something good out of them. Like they'll think that they're pretty positive. Like, okay, well they work great under pressure. They don't necessarily need good people skills because they'll just get the job done. And they work hard and they're motivated because they want the best for themselves and they'll do the best job. And so in their mind that these corporations are doing it because they're misinterpreting these traits.
Does that backfire for the corporation?
Yes, and that's their point, is that it backfires for the corporation. What they thought were these great traits end up leading to psychopaths, tearing corporations apart, fomenting these little infights and, divide and conquer. And it just becomes their little chessboard, their little war room, and they wreak havoc on corporations and businesses. But the more cynical way of looking at it might be like you mentioned, that these people are actively looking for these traits, knowing what's going on, and maybe just based on the way they're set up, if the psychopaths are the ones already in these positions and doing the hiring, then they themselves wouldn't be able to see the negative consequences of this, and maybe they just don't care. Maybe and so they're just in it for the quick buck. They're in it to make the money now, and who really cares about what happens in the future? Because that's the psychopath's mindset.
Interesting. And just a passage from the book, Political Ponerology, that we're offering for a $100 pledge this evening. Yours by calling 212-209-2950. Alan Harrington, uninvolved with others, he coolly saw into their fears and desires and maneuvered them as he wished. Such a man might not, after all, be doomed to a life of scrapes and escapades ending in a jailhouse. Instead of murdering others, he might become a corporate raider and murder companies, firing people instead of killing them and chopping up their functions rather than their bodies. I don't think this is from the book Political Ponerology, but it illustrates your point, because a lot of people write about this issue. Mm-hmm. Political Ponerology is the book by Andrew Wobachewski that we're offering to you this evening for a $100 pledge. Thank you for that call. When you call 212-209-2950, we will send you that book. We will also send you the CD. It's an MP3 CD of the past shows in other news for more than 28 shows, I believe. They all fit onto a CD as an MP3, yours for a $50 pledge, and we just went through a few of them. What I was trying to do here with In Other News is tie a lot of the topics together, so there's a central theme running through all the shows. We definitely cover geoengineering. We cover fluoride in the water. We cover radiation danger, with cell phones and other elements in our immediate environment. We covered psychic vampires. We covered political ponerology. We have some open lines. We talked to Jordan Maxwell. We talked with Colin Andrews. We talked about Skull and Bones. So you see there's a thread. There's a thread through a lot of the shows here. It's a little dark, but it's important to put some light on this darkness and encourage the dialogue with the listeners, and that's what's being done here in those shows as well. There's more than 28 shows, yours for a $50 pledge, and those are on an MP3 CD disc. Together, the book, Political Ponerology, $100 pledge, and the CD of MP3s, it's yours for a $130 pledge. Please call and show your support for this station, WBAI, with the courage to let this material get on the air here in New York City. Call 212-209-2950. This is one of the most incredible books Harrison just said, he told you, he said the most important book ever written. Is that what you said, Harrison?
Well, something like that. One of the, I'd say one of the most important books ever.
Why do you say that? Why is it?
Well, because it ties into what I started out saying at the very beginning of the show, is that when you look at human history, when you look at the human condition, when you look at all the suffering, and you look at all the attempts to change it, all the attempts at reform that have gotten nowhere, and when you keep all of that in your mind and you just think about the amount of suffering and carnage and warfare and murder and torture that goes on, and you think of the futility of all of the attempts to change it, and then when you realize the problem, when you realize the causal chains of effect that lead to these behaviors, then you start to see that a solution is possible, and that change isn't impossible, and that hope really is for humanity is really what I think drives this book and makes it so important, because it is something that hasn't been available. It is knowledge that has never been so scientifically, so methodically set out. Exactly how these processes happen, what the social conditions are, what the different types of people are, how they interact, the different events that happen, the different human reactions that they manipulate, and it just sets it out so clearly and offers the beginnings of some solutions that I think, if there is any hope for humanity, and that's an open question, then this would be it. And so I think that's the most important thing. I think that the human condition as we see it, where the power elites, the people in charge, have well, and even if we ignore that, and if we just look at the situation as it is with the state of nutrition and healthcare and psychology, and and technology, like you said about the other shows you've been having about cell phone radiation, we have all of these different toxins and assaults on our system coming from every direction, and these entire systems and corporations and businesses get so thoroughly entrenched that, and I mean monetarily and emotionally, so that to get rid of them, it would be impossible, and people don't want it, even knowing the harm.
You mean they're profiting from it immensely, and
exactly.
There's no turning back.
There's no turning back. So we have
it's amazing.
Yeah. So we've got the oil industry, so pollution. You have cell phone radiation. I was out today in the mall doing some shopping, and everyone I saw was, had their cell phone in their hand, looking at it, talking on it, texting, and it's just, and I just think how absurd it is, and these things can never change as long as the business model continues as it is, and the business model is basically that of a psychopath.
Oh, that's interesting how you phrase that, because to me, what's being exploited with cell phones is the natural ability for people to communicate with each other, and it's just, that's a very basic description, but to me, I think that's exactly what they did. One thing about that you mentioned too, another passage I found discussing psychopathy with business crimes, the consequences to the average citizen from business crimes are staggering. As criminologist George Bennett says, they account for nearly 30% of case filings in the U.S. district courts, more than any other category of crime. The combined burglary, mugging, and other property losses induced by country street punks come to about $4 billion a year. However, the seemingly upstanding citizens in our corporate boardrooms and the humble clerks in our retail stores bilk us out of between $40 and $200 billion a year, as opposed to the $4 billion, from just the street crime. I thought that was an interesting statistic. As you've pointed out as well. There are many levels of psychopathy. But we just heard Harrison Koehli talk about Political Ponerology, about this book that we're offering to you this evening for a $100 pledge. This is one of the most important books, he says, that has been written. It's yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. We have a CD of the past shows. I'll go through some of the topics in a minute, but that's yours for a $50 pledge. A MP3 CD of In Other News. You can't get this anywhere else. It's not up online. These are shows that are kind of scattered around a couple websites. But together, the book and the MP3 CD disc are yours for a $130 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. We have the book, Political Ponerology. We're talking in depth about the subject of this book here this evening with Harrison Koehli, one of the experts on the study of political ponerology. That's a study of psychopaths and power. He says it's a critical book. It's one of the missing pieces right now that can really make a difference in this world when people begin to understand what's behind this particular pathos, what's behind this particular psychology. Who are these people? What does it mean to be a psychopath? What are the elements of this pathology? These questions are answered in this book. And again, it's yours for a $100 pledge this evening by calling 212-209-2950. You'll get this book. We'll send you that book. We'll send you, when you pledge your support for $50, we'll send you the MP3 CD disc, and together it's a $130 pledge. So the pack is a really good deal, actually. But if you want to get them separately, get the book for a $100 pledge. Put it on your credit card. Put it on your Visa. When you ask, we'll take it out in installments. So you really won't even see it coming out of the account. But you will know that you did something really great for WBAI. You did something great to get this book, Political Ponerology, The Study of Psychopaths in Power, A Science on the Nature of Evil, Adjusted for Political Purposes. It's not the easiest read. I'll preface that because it's important to know that you'll have to go through it and take your time. Some people will actually plow through it. But it's one of those books where you're going to open it up and start a chapter, and it'll take a while to absorb because these guys did heavy research. It's about, how many pages is it? About 250 pages, but probably one of the most important 250 pages in a book that you'll have. This book, Political Ponerology, is yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950 and support this station, WBAI 99.5 FM, New York. It's the Pacifica station here on the East Coast, one of them. Yes, there's one in D.C., but we want to see the phones light up. Thank you for that call. We want to see the phones light up. We've got a half hour left here this evening. And we're talking with our guest, Harrison Koehli, who's been on before, and he took calls with listeners, which we had a really good, listen, we have a really good time on the 10 to 11 show, because we talk to the listeners. We open the phone lines nearly every show for a half hour, and the guests, we've had Jordan Maxwell on, Colin Andrews, we've had Harrison Koehli, who we're talking with right now, Dane Wigington, Rosalind Peterson, Chris Milligan, Dr. Joe Slade. We open the lines so the dialogue can continue with the wonderful listeners of this station. And again, so we're offering the book, Political Ponerology. It's yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. And the CD of the archive shows of In Other News, that's yours for a $50 pledge. Those are MP3s. Together, it's a $130 pledge. And that's where we're hoping you shoot for that. Again, if you want to be a member and do the buddy pledge, that's a $25 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. And so Harrison, this is this book really moved a couple listeners who went in depth to respond. I think I sent you a couple emails of one of the listeners who had been describing and connecting some dots himself, and he even mentioned that this is a missing piece of what's going on in this country and in the world. And when I say what's going on, what's going wrong right now. Yeah. So your work in Political Ponerology, what is some of the feedback that you get on this topic? Just with friends and some people who just have a basic interest.
Well, most people that I talk about it with have a pretty positive response, but it varies in certain ways. So, first,
please remember that this program is supported by the listener members of WBAI New York. If you like what you hear, please consider becoming a member of WBAI or renewing if you've already joined. Basic membership is $25, but we accept any amount. Help us keep free speech alive. This free program is paid for by the listeners of WBAI New York. If you're not already a member, think about joining us to help keep free speech alive.
It works. Okay, that makes sense. Because I think that on some level, most people are aware of these concepts. It's not a really foreign idea. Oftentimes we've got this little kind of postcard ad for the website Signs of the Times, SOTT.net, SOTT.net. It's an alternative news website that basically presents the news, everything from weather to health to psychology to current events. And SOTT.net. Yes, SOTT.net. And we use Ponerology we're basically affiliated with that site, and you can buy the book from there as well. But one of the things that you hear, the postcard ad says, it's got this, these cool graphics, and says 6% of the world's population are psychopaths or something like that, and it's got this kind of catchy little phrase on it. And when people see it, they go, "Oh yeah," and they kind of laugh and say, "Oh yeah, that's totally true." And they've heard nothing about ponerology. It's just something that they're aware of because they can see the connections. I can't count the number of times growing up that I heard, about jokes or, let's say, slightly off-color comments about politicians. This stuff it's known on a kind of common sense level, not necessarily with that kind of scientific rigor. And so when you combine the two, when you combine the common sense idea with the science, then that's when things start to be made crystal clear, and the picture just comes into focus.
And let me just say, the science is in this book, Political Ponerology. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's yours, listeners, for a $100 pledge that we're offering this evening when you call 212-209-2950. And one of our listeners had sent in, some really great emails, sort of thinking out loud, but it was not rambling. One point that he made, he said, every well-meaning group or organization that becomes large enough to cause a sizable impact on society will become infiltrated and undermined by psychopaths in 5 to 10 years. He goes, the only way to keep any organization on its original path is to somehow identify all psychopaths and prohibit their admittance to the group. I thought that was pretty powerful, and he began to relate that specifically to peace organizations, anti-war organizations, and I don't know if that's true, if that's how they crumble and fall apart and they don't have any sustaining impact. I'm not sure, but did you guys even go into that realm and study that?
Yeah, well, Wojciechowski actually deals with that, specifically in the book, and I thought that when you sent that to me, I thought it was a great little summation of the idea, because I don't know about the years, 5 to 10 years, maybe. I can't be sure about the time frame.
Sure.
But the idea, I think, is 100% correct.
Okay.
That every group, and that's important to know, every group that does not have this knowledge and does not actively enforce it and apply it will be infiltrated, whether that be through, let's say, something like COINTELPRO type operations, or just through the natural process. You've got a population, and you've got a certain percentage of psychopaths. When a group reaches a certain number, you'll get a certain number of psychopaths, and just that's what the book Ponerology describes, are these natural processes, how kind of the directions things turn. So when you have a psychopath in a group, there are specific things that happen. There are specific effects, psychological effects on the group members. And you have this kind of self-selection bias and process that starts happening. So the psychopaths will gravitate and move towards these positions of influence and power. They may be behind the scenes. They may be the eminence grise, the guy whispering the plan of action into the figurehead or leader's ear, and this effect starts happening. The group starts slowly going off track, but they keep the same language. Now, this is an important point. These aren't gangs or these aren't necessarily gangs or these rough and violent groups that necessarily come to power. It can be a totally innocent, well-intentioned humanitarian group that can be totally sideswiped by this psychopathic contagion, because what happens is these psychopaths, they start gaining influence, and then they just twist things ever so slightly so that they're still saying out loud the original aims and motivations of the group, so they still sound all high and mighty, but they start doing things in slightly different ways. And some members of the group will kind of see this. They'll get a whiff of it. They'll get a slight scent that something isn't going quite right, and they'll say, And then they might say, okay, well, this isn't what I signed up for. I can't do this anymore. I'm out of here. And you can get that in corporations, when there's a takeover, a merger or something, and, things just kind of change, and you can just feel it in the air. You can feel there's a different atmosphere. And so that might cause some people to leave, because, things don't seem as human as they did before. There's this kind of cold and, cold metallic kind of oppressive feeling that kind of comes in, and that's the way I'll describe it. And then later on, as the process develops and goes further along, it starts becoming more active. So not only do the more normal people leave, they start being actively denied entrance or being expelled from the group, or conflicts are arranged and set up so that they leave one way or the other. And again, you find this in corporations and business and politics. And if you just look at the history of politics and you read about the behind the scenes, everything that goes on behind the scenes, and with all these political maneuverings, they're classic psychopathic maneuvers. They're the effects of what Jadczyk calls ponerization of the groups. And the whole process put together is ponerogenesis. That's the origins and causes and processes of how what he terms evil comes about. So yeah, your listener, got it right. This is essential to know, because every group can and will be infiltrated one way or another. If it's just a matter of statistics, or if it's, and even then, I'll say that probably doesn't need to happen, because if you look at the history of let's just take the U.S. government specifically, with the history of COINTELPRO, the history of a government which has identified anti-war groups, groups with these humanitarian aims, who if you'd meet them in person, they turn out to be pretty decent people, right? There's not a terrorist in the bunch, and yet. And so these groups are the ones that the FBI targeted for infiltration and destruction. So they'd infiltrate them. They'd set up situations and conflicts so that the groups would fall apart, or get in conflict with other groups. So they'd isolate themselves.
And now they target them as terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. And they get labeled as terrorists. Yeah. Or terrorist sympathizers, or and they get put on watch lists and no-fly lists, and so they get hounded. And so these groups are controlled. This is an important point, because this is something that these groups don't want to hear. They don't want to hear that they've been infiltrated, that they're being steered in a direction that is counter to their aims, because they want to believe that they're doing good. And in a sense, they are. They've got good intentions, but you know what they say about good intentions. They pave the hell to somewhere. They pave the way to somewhere.
Indeed. And you just revealed where that somewhere is.
Yeah, accidentally.
And we need to feel the human support from our listeners right now, Harrison. And I really thank you for explaining some of the details, and especially the going into depth on what this listener had sent to me. And that's the thing. This listener heard the interview that we had done back in, when was it, in January, and he went out and bought the book. So that was one of the motivations to bring this book as a premium this evening, because I suspect that there are other listeners out there that would want this book as well. The book is called Political Ponerology, and we've been talking in depth about that for the past hour and 40 minutes. Political Ponerology is yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. And please support WBAI and Pacifica Radio and the show and other news, because we're going to cover a lot of material similar to this and connect to this as well, because this is not operating in a vacuum. This is operating actually behind the scenes, and is a missing piece in what's going on in our world today. As Harrison has pointed out several times, this book is a very, very critical book for many people to read. It's an academic book, but It needs to be read also by everyone, including academics. The book is called Political Ponerology. It's the science on the nature of evil adjusted for political purposes. And again, it was, as we were talking about earlier, the original manuscript of this book went into the furnace minutes before a secret police raid in communist Poland. And it went through several other incarnations before it had gotten here. It was thrown away. It was lost. A lot of the research was lost. But the third and final copy was written from memory by the last survivor of one of the original researchers, Andrew Wojciechowski. And then, even then, Zbigniew Brzezinski, as many listeners may know who he is, he blocked its publication. Excuse me. We're offering this book for you this evening for a $100 pledge. We need your support to pledge at that level, at the $100 level at least, to get this book, Political Ponerology. When you call 212-209-2950, you can put it on your Visa, you can put it on your MasterCard or American Express. Yes, there are volunteers in the back room, in the tally room, to take your call right now. When you call 212-209-2950 and support WBAI, support Pacifica Radio specifically, this radio station here with its transmitter on the Empire State Building, broadcasting, I believe, in a 180-mile radius across to Connecticut, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Staten Island, and Long Island, of course, the 5 boroughs. But we need to see your support. We need some people out in New Jersey to support this station this evening and support In Other News, because we are also offering the archive, the CD MP3 disc archive of In Other News that I briefly went over. We talked about Skull and Bones. We talked about the study of psychopaths. We talked about surveillance cameras, geoengineering. We have several shows on geoengineering. And that's just some of the things, the worldwide issues that are facing us today. We have preemptive wars, uncontrolled worldwide drug and arms trade, geoengineering, suppression of free energy. Who's behind this? A lot of people say psychopaths. What is the psychology of psychopaths? That's explained in this book, Political Ponerology. That's why it's the missing piece. It's the key. It's the pathos that wasn't allowed to be studied, and that's the reason why they didn't want people finding out. So at least to begin the screening process. And imagine if this book came out back in the 1930s, and the screening process evolved to this point where maybe it's a little camera that you can see a human aura or something that is very healthy and pulsating with life, something like that. It would have evolved, and we would have had a lot better circumstances. Yes, the thinking could go in that direction, but now we have another chance. There's another chance here. And as we are speaking with Harrison Koehli, one of the specialists in the study of political ponerology, that's the psychopaths who rise to power, we're starting to get a glimpse of what this really means, what this really is about. Thank you for those calls. The book is yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. We have the CD for you as well. It's a CD of the past shows of In Other News, where we talked about fluoride, we talked about geoengineering, we talked about some of the best experts and researchers that you don't really hear about at all, because they're busy working and writing books and putting research together. But we have them on this show In Other News. We have a nice thread in the topics of these shows, more than 28 shows. This is on an MP3 disc, yours for a $50 pledge together, and that's the deal, the book and the CD for a $130 pledge. Please call 212-209-2950. Do you think, Harrison, that there will be a some kind of evolved screening process that will be really easy to find, I guess, these hardened psychopaths in our midst?
I think it's possible. Do I think it'll happen? I'd say, with the way things are going, I'd say it's pretty unlikely. I think before anything like that happens, there needs to be huge change, and I mean from the grassroots level. because I just don't see either the inclination or the interest or the willingness to even look at these issues in the fields and systems that need them. So I think the systems of politics and corporations and the legal system, I think they're just too thoroughly Ponerized to be able to even be willing to take a look at it. And so I'm not completely out of hope, because I do think it's possible, but I don't know exactly how it's going to play out. I think that the first thing that will be needed is for a mass number of people to understand this and to basically demand it. And I think that's the only way it's going to happen. It's not going to happen from the top up, because the top is where the problem is.
And that's what we're trying to do this evening, actually, is bring this information to the grassroots. It's one of the critical keys here is understanding the psychopath diagnosis, the people who are involved at the highest levels and making the decisions. But who are these people, and what is their pathology? This is explained in this book, Political Ponerology, yours for a $100 pledge. Please call 212-209-2950. Yes, Harrison's got pessimism of the mind, but optimism of the heart. And that's why he is pulling this information together and presenting it to you, the listener, this evening. He's presenting the information that he has studied and researched over many, many years, and he's working with other incredible people to build this website, signofthetimes.net, SOTT.net. That's where you can find out more information. But this evening, we really need your support. When you call 212-209-2950, you can get Political Ponerology for a $100 pledge. And this is one amazing book. I've got it dog-eared, and it'll take a while to get through this book. And this is not a book that you're going to read and give it to somebody. I think you're going to hold on to this book for a while. Yes, it's 250 pages, but it's really in-depth reading. And you're going to dog-ear the page, you're going to mark the page, and it's going to be like, if you're an academic, you'll love this book. If you're interested in the topic, you'll really, really find this interesting. And it'll take a while to read, but it's critical and very important reading. And share the information with other people as well. The book is yours for a $100 pledge when you dial 212-209-2950. We've got 10 minutes left in this last hour, and my name's Jeff Brady. And this show is In Other News. I'm on the phone with Harrison Koehli, who is one of the top researchers on this topic, the study of psychopaths in power. And we're trying to raise some money here for WBAI and this Pacifica radio station. The book is Political Ponerology. It's yours for a $100 pledge. 212-209-2950. We're offering also the CD In Other News. That's basically the archive of the show. That's yours again for a $50 pledge. Together, a $130 pledge. We need to get this book into as many hands as possible. Political Ponerology, it's one of the keys here to figuring out and understanding the psychology, the psychopathy behind some of the problems that we have in our midst. We're trying to push through the suppression of free energy. You just start there. You're looking at the aerosol operations that we can go in depth on and what that's about. The drug and arms trade, central banking, on and on. Preemptive wars. It doesn't stop. Who's behind this? Harrison and this author and many others say psychopaths. The psychopathic mindset is behind this. And what is that? What is it actually? It's explained in this book, and we've been talking about it for the past hour and 50 minutes. But right now, this is when we need the show support. We need to see some of those phones light up. Please call 212-209-2950. The book is yours for a $100 pledge. Support WBAI and Pacifica Radio. Also, we have the archives of In Other News, which covers a range of issues. There's a common thread there. It's yours for a $50 pledge. Together, $130 will get you the book and the CD archives. So, Harrison, where are you going now to study more about and write more about this topic? I know you cover a range of issues that we discussed already. And do you research and look at that through the lens of psychopathy?
Yeah, I'd say once it's there, it's kind of hard not to see everything through that lens. Just try to see the implications of it in everything that you research. So some of the things that I and the group that I'm a part of that does this research have been doing lately and in the future is we've got a magazine called the Dot Connector Magazine where we apply these concepts and try to take as objective an approach as possible to topics everywhere.
I love that magazine, by the way.
Okay, great. Yeah, from politics to health, nutrition, we've got recipes in there, science, spirituality, a little bit of everything. We've got book reviews, movie reviews. So and you can check that out at you can either just Google Dot Connector Magazine, or I think the website is dotconnector.org. And so that's one venue that we've been using. Another, one of the things I've been doing lately is for the past couple of years I've been writing a series on SOT.net called Ponerology 101, where I've basically just been getting into the basics, kind of some information that's not necessarily in the book Ponerology, like some research that's come out since the book was written, or just from a different avenue. So I've gotten into the issues of, psychopathy on Wall Street and the corporate psychopathy, and some of the research that was done on the Nazis at the Nuremberg trials. And so that's one thing that I've been doing. And so, readers or listeners can check that out at SOT.net. And one thing that we're doing actually for Ponerology specifically is later this year we're going to be putting out a new edition of the book because one of the big complaints that we get is something that you've mentioned, that the book's just really difficult to read. The sentences are really long, really dense, really complicated. So what we're doing is we're going to release a new edition with that's kind of everything will be there, but we're clarifying the language, splitting up some of the sentences, just trying to make it flow better and read a little bit more easily, but at the same time adding a whole bunch of extra research and footnotes and just trying to basically bring it up to date and make it more accessible, because we know that it is a slog to get through, and so that's something that we're working on, and that should be. We're hoping to get that ready. I'm hoping by... You
can get through this book. I just want to tell listeners, you can get through this book, and this is the undiluted version. This is packed with information. Yes, the sentences are long, but the listeners can read long sentences here. It's almost guaranteed here at WBAI. And again, this book, Political Ponerology, is yours for a $100 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. You can also get the CD MP3 disc of the past and other news shows for a $50 pledge. We have volunteers back there waiting for your call. Together, a $130 pledge when you call 212-209-2950. And we'd like to thank you again for those calls. We don't have names right now to thank, but I just want to send out a big thank you for those past calls that you've given us. We have 5 minutes left right now before we end this evening. Show a little bit of your support here. Those of you who are interested in this topic and want to learn more, this is a great place to start and get a good knowledge base. And again, you'll be supporting WBAI. You'll be supporting Pacifica Radio, independent media. This is where a great place to start. If you just want to hear some of the past shows, you're curious about the show, the In Other News archive will put all the shows on a CD for you. That's yours for a $50 pledge. So that alone is it's a good place to start. We went through some of the topics from the toxicity of fluoride, skull and bones. We go into detail with an author who wrote the book Fleshing Out Skull and Bones. We interviewed John Loftus. He wrote about a book called America's Nazi Secret. We talked with Dr. Joe Slade about psychic vampires. We talked with Amy Worthington, who never does interviews, about the radiation state, TSA, the backscatter scanners, and the millimeter scanners that they're in airports now. This is yours for a $50 pledge if you pledge your support this evening by calling 212-209-2950. These shows are not on the internet. Some of them are, but they're not. They're taken off WBAI's site because the archives fall off the site after so many days. I think 90 days maybe. But we have them here. We'll put them on a CD for you as MP3s, yours for a $50 pledge. Again, the book Political Ponerology is what we've been talking about all evening. Yours for a $100 pledge. The MP3 archives, yours for a $50 pledge. Together, $130. When you dial 212-209-2950 and show your support for this station. And the listeners, I know you're out there because we talk every week now, and we talk with the guests and everything, and it's really wonderful. We'd really love to do that, but we thank you for those calls. We got to see a show of support this evening. The book Political Ponerology is yours for a $100 pledge. The CD of Archives of In Other News, a $50 pledge. Together, a $130 pledge. We have to wrap up this evening. Harrison, I just want to say thank you again for being on with us for the nearly 2 hours. It's just been a pleasure talking with you and learning more about the study of psychopaths and power, and why it is important to begin with, to understand why this is important. This is like one of the keys here. So, Harrison Koehli, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jeff. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Great. And remember, you can find out more of Harrison Koehli's work. He writes an article called Ponerology 101 on SOTT.net. And that'll do it for me, Jeff Brady. I'm out of here. See you. I think next week we're gonna be back on with another special fundraiser. But keep showing your support, and thank you all for those calls.
Danielle, a new volunteer at WBAI. If you can hear this, we have something in common: a love of knowledge, free speech, new ideas, and community. We hear all of that right here on WBAI. That is why I chose to donate my time to 99.5 FM. You can give back to WBAI too during the WBAI Spring Membership Drive. The drive will take place May 3rd through May 30th at 120 Wall Street. Your community station needs you to volunteer during our membership drive. Please send an email to volunteers@wbai.org or call 212-209-2826. Volunteer with me and keep this amazing community voice alive. Once again, the email address is volunteers@wbai.org or call Crystal at 212-209-2826.
If you were following WBAI on Twitter, you would have known about George Galloway's debut on the airwaves.
Please remember that this program is supported by the listener members of WBAI New York. If you like what you hear, please consider becoming a member of WBAI or renewing if you've already joined. Basic membership is $25, but we accept any amount. Help us keep free speech alive.